From the studios at RMG Productions, this is the Antidote to Deception podcast.
Welcome to the Antidote to Deception. Today we are tackling the issue of Sabbath versus Sunday. Here's something that might surprise you. Nearly 2 billion people worldwide attend religious services each week, but most have never questioned why they worship on the specific day they do.
That's such a fascinating observation. You know, I've never really thought about how these weekly patterns become so deeply ingrained in our lives.
Well, what's really interesting is that there's actually no explicit biblical command to worship on Sunday. The original Sabbath was observed on Saturday, and this was established at creation itself. When you dig into the historical records, you find this massive shift in religious practice that happened gradually over time.
So how did such a fundamental change take place without more people questioning it?
That's where the historical evidence gets really fascinating. In the early Christian church, there was actually a clear distinction between different types of Sabbaths. The weekly Sabbath was specifically called the Sabbath of the Lord, while ceremonial Sabbaths had different designations. This distinction is crucial because it helps us understand how the transition occurred.
Well, that's exactly the kind of detail that most people probably miss. Could you explain more about these different types of Sabbaths?
So in Leviticus 23, there's this really interesting contrast. The weekly Sabbath is described as the Sabbath of the Lord, but when it talks about ceremonial Sabbaths, like the Day of Atonement, it uses the phrase, your Sabbath. This linguistic difference isn't just semantic. It points to a fundamental distinction in their purpose and significance.
That makes me think about how other religious practices might have evolved over time. What about this whole debate about the Old Covenant versus New Covenant?
That's where many people get confused. There's this common misconception that the Sabbath was simply part of the Old Covenant, and therefore abolished. But when you look at Hebrews 8, it describes the New Covenant as being established on better promises. The key point is that the issue wasn't with God's original promises, but with people's ability to keep their end of the covenant.
So you're saying it's more about transformation than abolition?
Exactly. Think of it like learning to play an instrument. At first, you mechanically follow the sheet music, but eventually the music becomes part of you. That's what the New Covenant describes. Moving from external observance to internal understanding. And you know what's fascinating? Archaeological evidence shows early Christians continued observing the seventh-day Sabbath well into the 4th century.
That's really interesting historical context. But what about all those stories where Jesus seems to challenge Sabbath observance?
Well, when you examine those accounts closely, Jesus wasn't breaking the Sabbath. He was demonstrating its true purpose. In Luke 6, when he heals someone, he's showing that doing good and healing are completely aligned with the Sabbath's original intent. It's like he's restoring the day to its intended purpose, rather than abolishing it.
This whole discussion really challenges our assumptions about religious traditions.
And that's precisely why it matters so much. When we understand the why behind our practices, our faith becomes more meaningful and personal. It's not just about picking the right day. It's about understanding the purpose behind these sacred times in our lives.
That's such a thoughtful way to look at it. What would you say to someone who's feeling overwhelmed by all this information?
I'd suggest starting with simple questions. Why do I worship when I do? What's the historical background? What does Scripture actually say about this? The goal isn't to make immediate changes. It's about growing in understanding. And interestingly, studies show that people who understand the historical context of their religious practices tend to have a more robust and lasting faith.
That really brings everything into perspective. It's about making our faith authentic rather than just going through the motions.
Exactly. Whether someone ultimately decides to change their practice or not, the process of questioning and understanding can only lead to a deeper, more meaningful faith experience. That's really what this whole journey of discovery is about, moving from blind tradition to informed conviction. Thanks for joining us today on the Antidote to Deception podcast. Please visit theantidotetodeception.com for more on this topic, or see the description for the link. See you next time.
You have been listening to the Antidote to Deception radio program. Join us next time as we continue to lift up Jesus Christ and His power to change lives.